All right. Hello, good morning, and welcome back to the Game Dev Show. Today we've got a lot of people here, maybe even more showing up. We got Story, Greg, Yori, Powell, and myself, and everybody who's here with us in chat. If you're here with us in chat, say hello. And if you've got questions, feel free to drop them in. I'm sure we'll be taking a bunch of questions. We've got a couple interesting topics. I think we get into some networking, rendering, animation, and other stuff. I did want to briefly mention that last night I held the first local meetup, which went really well. It was lots of fun. A couple local game developers showed up, and the artist from Proto Factor was there as well. It was really cool. Got to see some people's games, and yeah, it was good. So I'm going to try to go to a bunch more of those in the near future. Highly recommend it. Anyway, good morning, everybody. How y'all doing?
Great. How are you?
Great.
Good. Yeah, all great here. Anybody have any big news before we get into topics for the week? Nothing at all?
Big news? No. Just normal news that there's spring sale and nature manufactured assets are on it.
Oh, that's right. Are they? Is today the day? Did they go live for the?
No, they are just normal. Yeah, the flash deal was last week, and it went quite nice.
Oh, that's right.
It was, the environmental bundle was second most selling asset on Asset Store. So.
Oh wow, it's a great bundle. I mean, it's good stuff. I just linked it in chat for everybody as well. Go check it out. What all is in that environment bundle? You want to tell everybody real quick, or do you want to screen share it real quick and give everybody a quick preview?
So, 1 second, I will screen share. I always forget to have it set up. Yeah. To make quick screen share.
You got to have a button there to just screen share the environment pack.
Yeah. But it's always behind me, yeah? So that's second thing. But yeah, I think that stays.
There it is, nice and reversed.
Yeah.
But that's what it looks like. The link is in chat. You can see it without the words. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, so the environment bundle, it has quite a lot of things. Yeah, we have mountain, forest, meadows, so are the dynamic nature most sold. We have RAM and LVE, and so all the packs along with World Streamer, which is also one of our biggest technological pack for creating big open worlds. So yeah, that's quite a big pack. It's still 50% off.
So I want to ask a question really quickly about World Streamer. So how does that pack actually work? Like, do you list up in the list of chunks that you need, or?
Okay, 1 second. I will go back to myself. We made a hack. We are taking the entire. If you have big scene, we split it into several smaller scenes, and depending on your location, we are streaming the scenes. The scenes can be split into several layers. Yes, so you have layer for terrain, for low poly terrain. You have layers for smaller objects, bigger objects, and additionally, if you have interiors, each interior can be streamed like separate object. That's based on your distance to this object, or if you're entering some kind of collider that's around it, it streams in it. Yeah, so it's a lot of streaming in, streaming out, because this is the only option that you can have something not breaking you asynchronically in Unity.
Okay. Follow-up question. You said it's multiple scenes. It's actually using the scene objects.
Yeah.
So basically, it's walking out of the box for distributed authority in that code too.
Mostly, yeah. Yeah, we mostly did it for MMO games. Yeah, there's lots of MMO games that use it both on the server side and on the client side. Yeah, because on server side, they can calculate something and then send it the same way. We have calculations because not only we have this, we have also looping, and we have also the floating point error fixes there. Yeah. So when you're moving, because if the terrain objects, I think our demo terrain is about 10 by 10 kilometers, something like that. While we test it, we are giving the 4x4 in the pack for players, but we are mostly testing on 10 by 10. So even after 2 or 4 kilometers, you have problems with physics, you have problems with lightning. So without pointing things, you would have problem. So we have the calculations that you can just hook up into real player calculations, the looping calculation positions, the real position, the floating point position. So you can hook up everything and connect everything to it.
That's incredible. And also, you're basically saying, hey, here's quarter of Valheim.
Yeah, many big games. Yeah, there's quite a few games that are using it and using it quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, just like in the sample, though, that's already like a ton you can experiment with environment-wise.
Yeah, we have... can I showcase WordSlimmer quickly? Or give a link? Yeah, because the WordSlimmer demo scene, I think I have a link somewhere.
And for everybody watching that doesn't know, this World Streamer is one of the assets. Just it's inside that environment bundle.
Yeah, or you can also buy it separately, but I think the bundle is a better option always.
I just linked it in chat too if anyone wants to go check it out. So the one they're talking about, it's one of the nature manufacturer assets. It works well with their terrain.
Yeah, I will just
environment packs.
Transition again.
There you go.
I think it will be reversed. Yeah, as always. Yeah. So let's zoom in on this one. Yeah, so mostly you can see how it works. Yeah, this is the demo scene that I am talking about. And the demo scene over here is that's a small city. That's this white part. And the rest is an entire big terrain with one road, lake, and some forests. And this is demo scene with the demo assets with trees, city, some buildings, and so on inside the WordSlimmer pack.
It's very nice that you can see the scenes loading in and out, and it's at relatively high speed too, and you don't see like any stops as it happens.
Yeah, and this is editor version. Yeah. In editor, async loading is slow, very slow. Async loading in build version is lots faster. Yeah? And here is what I said, that if you go closely, you can load interiors of the buildings and so on. Yeah. And we used, since we at the beginning of the project, we were thinking about using prefabs, slimming textures, and so on. But since are quite faster in Unity, unfortunately, you can't slim anything other than textures in a good way.
Yeah. Won't addressables solve some of this, or is it just the building process of the asset that's the problem?
The loading, how Unity loads everything is mostly the problem. Yeah. That's the problem. You can many people take WordSlimmer and just hook up addressables to it. We are still thinking, should we add it as the base version or not? Because it's more problematic for users that they don't use addressables in their project, and hooking up addressables in something like that isn't as much work. If you're on level that you use addressables, you can do it yourself within a day. Yeah, I would say to be fully about few hours. Yeah, because we are mostly using links to scenes, so you just swap up links to scenes to addressables, and you just change the 2 lines codes of loading scene to loading addressable. Yeah. So that's not as much work to do it.
Yeah, I don't know. Go ahead.
That's crazy amount of work to get like a really good asset going. And I wanted to say, like, this system is basically almost on par with what Unreal Engine is doing, which is a very nice thing to have because Unity doesn't come with that out of the box. So for people who haven't used Unreal here, in Unreal 5 specifically, they added a system of large world coordinates to support the idea of very large worlds. And the way that they do that is they basically split the world into chunks, and you have a chunk viewer where you can see like a grid of possible areas in the world, and each area can have multiple layers which you can load in and out. So if you have a city, you can have a city that's like in a good state and a city that's ruined if anything happened in the game that would warrant certain objects changing. And you have a very like convenient set of tools to do that, and they do the whole streaming for you, and it supports very, very large world coordinates. So Powell just basically showed you a system that has that in Unity, which is great.
Yeah, and I think the biggest, I can quickly switch again. The biggest project I saw using it wasn't even a game. Yeah, the biggest project that was used by artist, he's called Martin. Marnix Denis. He's an Dutch, Netherlands artist. He creates entire worlds in point clouds. Point clouds can be big. This city that you see on the screen had, I think, about 200 million points in it. And was streamed at 120 FPS from high poly to low poly worlds.
That's crazy.
Keith was asking in chat about World Streamer and how it works with like multiplayer games with a client server hosted or like a client hosted setup. If you're unloading the world on the host, how does that work? Do you guys have thoughts or recommendations around that?
It mostly the World Streamer just loads and deloads scenes. Yeah, that's mostly what it does in the simplest way. So how you manage it on your host or the client side, it's your decision. Yeah. You can have everything loaded on both sides. You can have it only loaded on client side and only some part of it loaded on the host side. Yeah, depending how authoritative is your client host setup. Yeah, because it mostly we don't do it because it's so many different possibilities and so many different aspects, because you can have peer-to-peer, you can have host client. They're all the typical network stuff that you want. You can mostly use it with all kinds of stuff you want. You just have to think your version of it. Yeah.
I mean, you could just have other scenes that aren't being loaded and unloaded as well, right? For the server that are just, or the hosts that are managing those objects and keeping
them. And the
alive.
same is we also add the tool that you can, in editor, you can just stream yourself the part you want to work on if you have a big team, because working on big open areas shouldn't be worked in one scene. Yeah. So mostly we suggest doing the first version in bigger one scene and then splitting into separate smaller chunks and you work only on one smaller chunk. And we have tool for that, so you can load this chunk, you work on it, you save it, so you can have multiple people working on the different parts of the world without any problems, sending and on Git checking who changed what on which scene.
With designers stomping over each other's changes, that's like the best part. Like I spent the whole day working on this thing, and then this other jackass ruined all my work. And they start fighting, and then they get drunk after work. And
what, you're not using the Unity built-in diff tool?
Yeah, nice work with it, and it works with any. I see a question from TechDave. It works with any terrain, and mostly, it's, as I said, it streams scenes. So whichever you use, it's just this. Whichever terrain you use, and Jason Boot Microverse is also using terrain, Unity built-in terrain, and it builds upon all of that. Yeah, but mostly if you create bigger open worlds, you should have separate layers. Yeah, first layer should be Unity terrain, then you should have some kind of LODs, mostly mesh LODs for distant terrains. You shouldn't use Unity terrain further than 1 kilometer from the place you are standing. Further away, it should mostly be some meshes. If you're making some flyby, it mostly should be only meshes, not Unity terrain, because it's too slow.
Yeah,
that's one thing as well that I wanted to say is that it may sound stupidly obvious to you, but I do think it's actually something that is probably a problem with the marketing of a lot of these kinds of systems, is people intrinsically think terrain conceptually is different than meshes. And so with a tool like yours, a lot of people are like, oh, that's for terrains. And I don't think they're even conceptualizing the fact that if you had a giant maze of buildings and like places you could go in and out, that it's not, there's no difference in terms of like scene streaming and you know, internals and outsides. But because there's no real demos of that outside of labyrinth and maze generators, people have no concept that it's actually the same thing. That if you're talking about flying around Spider-Man, you know, in Manhattan or something, or if you're doing an internal giant maze underground, it's all the same, and it's just you're basically doing the same thing. Terrain has some extra stuff for painting and whatever, but fundamentally it's meshes being streamed in and out. So I don't know, just something that I've always thought about is I think it would be a good case for there to be some demos of, you know, internal large spaces, because I think people actually get confused about that. I think they assume this is terrain related entirely, and that throws people off who are not inclined to make open worlds. Like if you're not going to make a game that's outside crafting and mining, you might think this isn't for you, when actually if you're making a game with locations that expand, it's for you, right? And I don't think people realize that.
And it's
Yeah.
especially useful if you have like many objects per area, because the idea is that you bucket them into scenes without having to think about it anymore, because the tool is doing it for you, which is how things are ought to be. You shouldn't be like having to micromanage which part of the memory this furniture piece belongs to. If you move it a bit to the left and it's part of like a different kilometer, you can let that be handled by a system, which is basically what WorldStreamer will do for you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we mostly do say it in the description of the WordStreamer. The description for the WordStreamer is quite long because it's heavy asset. We also added into our documentation. It's, I think right now it's about 50 pages long information about streaming, how you should do it yourself, what are the concepts of streaming in normal games and why WordStreamer helps it, and going through all the systems that WordStreamer has. And there's I think 1 hour long tutorial about WordStreamer and why you should use each step of it and how it was built. Yeah. It's amazing thing, and I always, if somebody asks me, I would have to find but if you want to know why to use it, there's a great GDC talk about Spider-Man game and how they build the world and how they build streaming. It's amazing post-mortem, and I love it, but it's so technical that if you don't want to do open world game, I wouldn't go into it, because they went even deeper than we went. Yeah, because they created their own chunks, their own elements, and streamed everything with them.
That talk was gold. I remember it. I don't remember the name though.
Yeah, I'm just looking for it always.
Yeah,
they've actually done a couple more as well. They did another talk entirely about how they did the inside projections for the buildings and stuff too. They did a whole lot of different talks. On
Yeah. The talks about Spider-Man are gold for open world games. Yeah, they open so much of it, so much information that.
Yeah. In regards to networking and streaming, I just wanted to add to Keith Collier's question. So when you have a server, the server needs to be able to simulate what the clients are doing, and that requires that the areas around the clients are loaded to a degree. Now, you can have a simpler presentation for the server. For example, you don't need all the exact colliders that a client would have, like at high precision, to be present on the server, as long as you don't verify that kind of stuff. But you do want the gameplay authoritative aspect, like this enemy spawns here, this is where the treasure chest goes, etc. If you have something like WorldStreamer, the client would only need to have the areas that they visibly care about loaded for themselves. If you make sure that no other logic runs on the places that they are not nearby, because it's possible by default by most networking solutions that the server just gives visibility of everything to everybody, which is not what you want when an area is not loaded for a certain client. So you want to control the visibility and limit it. As for precision issues, as Powell mentioned, when you get into high coordinate counts, the floating point, which is what you use to describe where something is, gets less and less accurate because it's limited in the amount of memory that it stores, so it can store infinite values. So the values get less accurate the farther away you stray from zero. And what that does for you is that on the client, WorldStreamer would set everything relatively close to zero, which means the coordinate system is no longer the same as what it would be on the server. So now you have to begin translating back and forth, which is where the hardest part would come if you are using that kind of thing. But you don't necessarily have to use that if you have like different overlaying scenes that are all relatively close. One thing that I see a lot of games failing to take advantage of is that you may have a wall that's like 10 kilometers, but you only have like 1 kilometer of height technically in use in most games. What you can do is have multiple walls at like 2 kilometers offset from each other, and you just make sure you never see that because the camera by default would only see like to 1K distance. So you can have actually multiple planes, and they're all like different areas of the world, and you can just hop between them, staying at relatively low coordinates.
And as well, for the logic you're talking about too, it's worth noting that even if logic is running on terrain chunks the player can't see, you don't even need to run those terrain chunks, right? Like if you had a factory game like Satisfactory where you had giant conveyor belts that crossed your entire map, the only logic that's really running is a tick rate of object movement across time over that. And so you don't need to load all those chunks to like physically move things if the player can't see it. So you can offload that to literally an increment that's happening over time until such time as the player steps into view and so on. So it's not even just the visual side of it. Like the logic can be completely divorced. And they talk about that in the Spider-Man thing as well, is that if you've got things like characters moving, do you really need animators and colliders and all that stuff? Not really. You just need a dot that can be positioned at the right place by the time you come back. And in the case of like combat, same thing. Do you need to run the full cycle, or can you just estimate what combat might happen? If the player can't see it, conceptually, if you turn the corner and one health bar is half, you're imagining what fight would have happened.
Yeah, and in Unity, I would use one thing, streaming and calculating what out of screen what's happening, but also used cooling groups, for cooling groups for checking for everything like that. We made in our streamer, we made a demo for physics, that when the player is if player is far enough from the objects, it turns off physics for all the objects that are outside of cooling groups, and you can do it in separate ways.
Well, I have a question for Uri. You were talking about stacking worlds so you keep your coordinates low. How would you handle when you get close enough to the edge that you should be able to see into the beginning of the next quadrant over?
Oh, no. So I meant like if you have interiors or other things, you can just like reduce the amount of the world that you actually need to access. Like if you are moving into a dungeon, you don't have to load necessarily a new scene. You can just move the player such that they are in a place where they cannot see things, like an area beneath the world that is adequately distanced from where most of the other gameplay would be, so you don't have like a situation where if an enemy throws a fireball and it flies a bit into the void, it actually gets into like some weird coordinate in the normal plane. So that's what I was describing though.
Okay, so you're talking about like contiguous.
But like a very simple example is if you ever played Zelda Ocarina of Time, there's a load of potholes you can jump in for secret levels, like little underground places. All of those are one level. They're actually all this giant set of little mesh circles that are under the ground. And then you load in and drop into this like secondary layer of the map, which is each of these different individual moments. And so rather than like physically moving characters to spaces at weird indexes, you can basically like push them down a bit, and it's like even if that place would be far away, you can conceptually just have layers of stuff loaded
in. One more thing to add here is that if you do want certain areas of the world to be present in different coordinate axes from what you're seeing, you can have just fake meshes, and as you get closer, you move the player into it, and then you teleport them to the other area. That is far harder to do because you're micromanaging like where things are. But if you use the parenting hierarchy system in Unity, you can actually just cheat a lot and just move an entire object. I don't recommend it, especially not in network games, because most network games try to operate on the assumption that you will only be using root objects. That's a whole rabbit hole that we may want to dive into. I'm not sure. But yeah,
Jason, can you? I added 3 links to the chat. Can you add them to the chat? Send them to user.
Yeah, I'll put them in the description right now. I'll add them all in there. I put in the World Streamer link as well, so everybody can go check that out. And I was gonna pop it up right here. Everybody wants to go grab it while it's half off. There was a question too about that tile map side though. So
I will go
tile
into
map?
tile
Is
map.
that something you would do?
Yeah, I will just say, because I gave there are 3 amazing links. One is Procedural Crafting Manhattan for Marvel Spider-Man. That's one. Second, in Marvel Spider-Man Technical Postmortem. And third one is Making the World of Firewatch. Each showcases the thing that Yorai and Greg were talking about, how to stack the words, how to use them, and how it was done in Firewatch and in Spider-Man. If you want to
although correct me if I'm wrong, didn't Firewatch use sector streaming? I could be wrong, but I thought that's what they use.
They use sector streaming, but you can see farther away, and they made the map with several gaps that when you see into the gap, they stream the next sector, and they especially try to avoid the floating map fix. Yeah, there's different approaches. That's why I'm giving both the Firewatch and both the Spider-Man, because there are different approaches. Yeah, because in the Firewatch they make you don't see something before they stream it, and in
I did like that.
Spider-Man. And in Spider-Man, you always see what's in front of you, because you can go up and see the entire Manhattan, so they stream a little differently. Yeah.
Yeah, that is something to mention too. That it's actually, I quite like that on the Firewatch talk, where they're like, sometimes we just have to put a big tree there. Why? Because if you could see the portion of that, we'd have to load it, and so here's a big tree. And so they talked about locations where they just had to like make new geometry just to obscure your view at the right locations.
As for tile maps, yes and no, yeah, because it depends how big the time map is. Yeah. Unity time maps mostly are one object that you can't just split up just like that. Yeah, you would. We didn't add it automatically. You would have to split it separately in bigger chunks, and then it would then work without any problems.
Yeah. Just to clarify, it's a single in-memory object that is spanning the whole grid. Therefore, you cannot just manually calculate, oh, these things need to go there, because there are no these things. It's a single object, which is basically on Unity's part. There is one clever use, you can kind of hack it together if you care, where most of Unity's brush tools can actually let you place objects without the use of an actual tile map. Now, it's disastrous for a different reason, but you can actually make just objects and like paint them around as if you're working on a tile map without actually having a tile map, and then letting a different tool take care of the batching of those.
How would you go about building a game that had like a big open world tile map if you were going to do it in Unity? Would you use the built-in system? Would you use a different system? Is there something you would do?
So I just want to point out that like with Terraria, what we're doing is essentially we're like handling everything, with manual C#. So we don't actually have like anything that is Unity specific. The way this works in Terraria, and I can talk about it, it's been in mods for a while. You basically have an in-memory 2D array of tile classes. Could they be struct? Yes. Should they be struct? Yes, the classes. Now, with that in mind, what we do is that when the screen is rendering, we have a thing that basically goes, draw this section of tiles from this part to that part. And we just manually draw what we need. They are all in memory for the server. They are all loaded at once. We don't do any streaming. The world is always loaded, and it's always simulating fully. Which means if you put a block that spreads slowly, it will spread slowly throughout the entire game session. As for what you are seeing, that's an entirely different story. When you enter a world, only the part that you care about is loaded. And essentially the entire rest of the world is unloaded and is void. It's basically air. If anything is dropped there, it would fall. I say would because we have a system that says, if this block is null and void, you don't update. And now you have entities that are stuck until the server keeps sending updates for them if it thinks that they are relevant for you. The server is doing checks to say, oh, this area is actually loaded for that player. Therefore, let's send them an update for this kind of thing. And then you get a very interesting system where all the NPCs that would be close to you are acting entirely normal because they are fully simulating on the server and you get to see them, but you are not paying the processing cost of anything that is not actively near you. And because in Terraria you can open a map that shows you the entire world and where things are there, so other players moving, other NPCs moving, bosses flying at different players, you can see all of that happening in real time on the map, but they're not actually updating, they're just teleporting around because they are high priority enemies and the world isn't loaded for them, but the server keeps teleporting their positions for you because it's updating them, so you get to see approximately where they are. You don't need the fully accurate information, you just need roughly where they are. So it works. As for how I would do this in Unity, honestly, I would stick to mostly the same. I probably would want to use something dots adjacent, which is to say, try to represent the simplest data I can, and then just only draw the parts that I care about, or build a mesh for that local area based on what the serialized data representation is. And there are multiple reasons for that. I using full Unity objects for an entire large world is unhealthy because you are going to need like different LODs, and in Terraria everything is like fully dynamic. You can place anything anywhere essentially. So I wouldn't have a way to like bake this kind of information down. It's all dynamic, which means multiple scenes is not something you can necessarily gain benefits from, because you don't have anything to bake. The world is generated for you. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Procedural worlds are harder to stream than normal ones. You have to have different concepts for them.
Yeah, exactly. On that note, some people brought up V-Rising. V-Rising had an amazing 3-hour stream with Unity. They talked a lot about their systems there. They even talked about how they're doing like preparing off the baked chunks. They are using dots, I think 0.1.8 or 0.1.7 before they went to the 0.5 update. And they showed like a lot of stuff, how they're baking, how they're doing the sun exposure system. So in V-Rising, you play as a vampire, and you actually need to be in the shadows of things in order to not get like burned by the sun. And what they're doing is essentially they placed simplified colliders for everything in the game, such that if you are near a tree, the tree actually blocks the light, and they're using an actual raycast towards the sun to see if you are actually hurt by the sun for it, which is very, very fun to see. So
I'm putting the link in the description right now too, so everybody can go check that out afterwards. Hit the like button and then queue those up. I put all of the video links in there and try to update them while we're on the stream, so that way I don't forget to do it later.
I'll have to check that one out myself, because I'm always fascinated by anything which is a sort of a mental disconnect between people's expectations and the systems. I won't go into like a whole Overwatch rant here, but a lot of the systems in Overwatch have a visual representation that's spherical, that's actually raycast, or vice versa. And there's a lot of really fun edge cases. One of my favorite examples is someone standing behind a wall and a bomb blows up on the other wall, but the wall is actually like got little grid window holes in it. And because it's raycast based, he gets spotted and it blows up. And it's, from his perspective, complete nonsense. But these little moments are very fun for me, because the other one too is if character's got an ability which is meant to protect everyone in a radius, but again, it's raycast based from a ring. And so if you're standing beside a lamppost and the lamppost happens to block that one singular raycast line hit, they don't get the special ability that would save their life. And so all of these, like how you handle things with like simplified representations, are always fascinating to me.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. I have to see that. I haven't actually watched this whole thing. I saw part of it when it was live, the V-Rising stream, but then I didn't actually see it all. Yeah, I gotta go back and watch it. Get it queued up now.
You actually reminded me something that I'd like to bring up here, like relatively quickly. In Terraria, there are many edge cases where we're doing like favors for the player, wherein if the player is doing an attempt to hit an enemy, we use an advanced like casting of like from every part of the hitbox to every other part of the hitbox, like really try to figure out, hey, is there any way you actually hit the enemy? But if the enemy is trying to do the same to the player, no, the simplest way possible. Make sure that the player is getting like what they think they should be getting. It's basically going that way. You want to make sure that players have a good time. If they feel like it should hit, it should hit. And if they can get away with anything, let them get away with it, in my opinion. That's actually something that you'll see in a lot of combat games as well. The entire idea of immunity frames and being generous with them towards the player. So you start an immunity frame way earlier than you think it should be, or you give the weapon a bigger hitbox than it needs to have to hit the enemy. You start the attack earlier for the player, as opposed to enemies which only evaluate if they hit you near the end of their actual animation. That's actually one really big thing with Elden Ring and Dark Souls. You can modders have made tools that you can see actual hitboxes of things. So if you have a greatsword and you try to use like a stabbing attack with the greatsword, the tip of the sword, it's actually an entire capsule. It's not the sword mesh. to start with. So you have like the entire width of the capsule trying to hit an enemy, even if it's not visually on the enemy. And the tiny tip of the sword is not actually that accurate. So it peeks out. So that part like could touch an enemy and like not actually hit it. It's a lot of like really small things of that sort.
That's actually a really big deal. And here's like, again, I won't bore people with too much Overwatch stuff, seeing they don't even play it anymore, but it was a game that I studied so much, so I know a lot of the details. Something that was really fascinating to me is they did a rebranding very recently because they were kind of losing players, and they made a huge pile of changes. I'm talking like a good 2 pages worth of changes. And one of the ones which confused a lot of people, but is actually the biggest change that actually feels a lot better now, is they made all of the hitboxes for all of the bullets for everything larger, and they made all the damage weaker. And so they basically made it so that, or you'll get hit an awful lot more, but everyone succeeds at hitting more. And so the whole game is suddenly everyone feels more successful because everyone's hitting more shots, hearing more of the critical hit shot sounds, and there's more opportunities for people to heal up over time and stuff. And it also disincentivizes people standing out in the open as much, but it like promotes health and all this other stuff. So the gameplay is entirely shifted, and it's made the game like 10 times more cooperative based, purely because they made invisible hitboxes larger because of the way people were engaging with the game. It disincentivizes things like running off by yourself because there's now like a debuff that happens to healing if you're shot alone, all sorts of weird little quirks, but it's completely changed the way the game works, and all because of these sort of invisible things. And one last one on that, which isn't Overwatch, thankfully, is another one I've heard that's pretty fun, is a lot of games will have a back hit kind of debuff for enemies, where basically if you presumptively haven't seen the enemy yet and something comes up behind you, it's extremely unsatisfying to get hit by something you never saw. So they'll literally keep track. If you've never seen the enemy and it's about to hit you, it'll literally do a fraction of the damage it normally would. So you'll get the fright, but you'll have time to react to it. And so in some games, there's like speedrun tactics where you know where the spawns are and you literally turn your back and let the thing hit you because it's not going to do as much damage as it normally would because of the defense mechanism systems and stuff. So there's a lot of really interesting strategies there too.
The Overwatch thing sounds like everyone gets a trophy here.
I would actually argue it's quite the opposite. It's everybody has to walk kind of evenly. Like the idea that because genetically you can see something, spot something better, and aim more accurately, you should always get the win is like the very classical shooters. You have a lot of that, but in a skill-based shooter, like with actual characters based shooter, you want to be able to use those skills and not say, okay, the sniper rifle always wins because it makes the best use of my capacity. So it lets you live the fantasy of having the character skills actually being in use effectively. And it also makes everything like a more even ground where, again, cooperation matters and actually thinking out how you want to play it matters instead of, okay, because there was like this one pro player here, everybody else gets to lose.
There's actually some interesting things to, again, I got to go on this for ages, but one thing that really fascinated me is you look at a game like Counter-Strike or Valorant and you're thinking that game is much more accurate based. Like they have really tight hitboxes, it's all very whatever. But the funny thing is, there's a lot of players of CSS who went to Overwatch and they actually didn't do very well. And there's lots of players who went from Overwatch into games like Valorant and they did very well. And the people were looking at, why is this? Why is there a disparity in the relationship, despite the fact that Overwatch is supposedly the safer, larger hitboxed game? But it's because Overwatch is faster. It's a game where you have to respond more, react more, and there's a lot more ability-based stuff where you have to be more heightened aware of each sound, each thing. And so even though they don't have the pixel accuracy of other games like Valorant, the overall game sense is completely different, and you can get better at slowing down and positioning, but it's a lot harder if you come from a game that's about patience and slow detection and hitting the exact movement pixel than it is with like a million things going off you have to be aware of at all times and balancing all of these numbers. And it's kind of fascinating how there's actually a lot more of it. Like people think one's low skill and one's not, but like the balance is very, very different in terms of what you're paying attention to.
Yeah, and speaking of the attention in Overwatch, at least at Overwatch 1, was pretty crazy because the maps were colorful. It's something that I never had to discuss with a friend until like I played Overwatch 1. Basically, the more your eyes can distinguish important information quickly when you're getting a large pool of information, the better. Which means if the game helps you distinguish important information from non-important information, the game is like literally giving you skill, TM. A lot of the shooter games that existed up to Overwatch 1 were mostly trying to use like the same color palette for the rest of the map, for like the entirety of the map that is adequately different from the characters, such that it's easy to spot characters whenever you flick the screen, because in first-person games, just the tiny tilt of your mouse can reveal like a half screen's worth of new information. In games like League of Legends, where you look at the map from above, that will not happen. You can tilt the map, but you don't get as much new information because it's not a full shift of like where everything is. And in Overwatch, the maps were so colorful that I had a problem like finding what I'm actually supposed to aim at. I would like turn around and I'll see a fountain. And I'm like, I'm not supposed to look at the fountain.
And talk about attention, by the way, too. Like I said, with a top-down game, you have the entire board visibly in front of you. In Overwatch, in first person, there are enemies that can fly, enemies that can roll past you, enemies that can be invisible, enemies that can teleport, and as of the most recent character, enemies that can burrow underground. So there's an entire range, and there's turrets that can stick to walls. So like the amount of like spatial information you have to be aware of at the same time. And so there's a reason why there's a lot of the sound design in that game is probably the smartest thing in my opinion of the whole game. I could honestly talk about just the sound design for absolute hours, because if you've played it as long as I have, I could close my eyes and I can describe a game to you. I know every character. I can tell you who's on what team. I can tell you what abilities they've got, all this kind of stuff, just because every sound is not only unique, but even unique per team side. They actually change things like volume level, and some of the voice lines will be different if the same voice line is said by the opponent on the same character. So if you know the game well enough, you can be, oh, that's this character, but this character on that team. Or I can hear this character walking up behind me, but it's mine or not mine based on volume levels and stuff. So it's really, really tuned to that kind of stuff where you won't pick it up when you're first playing. It's a cacophony of random stuff. But if you play it for long enough, it's like you have so much information at your disposal and you can start to tune out the automatic behaviors. And that's why I was so impressed with the game, because I don't even like, again, I don't play online games much. I don't play multiplayer games much. I like single player games, but something about that game on a technical level was so fascinating to me that it hooked me in from all of the like the sheer levels of cleverness going on at these kind of academic levels.
One more important thing to mention here. You said how the enemies' footsteps are different from yours. In League of Legends, they do a similar thing where they color the VFX of a character's skills differently if it's on your team or on another team. I think one of the first visceral examples of that was Syndra. It's a mage that spawns orbs, and the orbs would deal a lot of damage to you, and she could pick up the orbs and throw them back at you. Now, there could be two Syndras on opposite teams if you are playing blind or in one of the special game modes. So what they did was they colored the orbs differently on their edges, depending on if she was on the enemy team or not, because fights in League of Legends get really, really chaotic. You have 10 characters that are basically overlapping each other as far as the screen is concerned, or you used to when the map was smaller and everything was slower. But yeah.
Nice. Well, yeah, it looks like somebody works with or knows one of the sound designers there. So that's apparently a thing. I remember on most of the games that I worked on, the MMOs specifically, we didn't have sound designers really. At least not that I saw. There was like one guy with a sound studio that was in charge of like doing everything for all the audio. But it's nice to see that people pay attention.
Yeah, and it's the other thing too is like we talked about Foley before, briefly, but there was a video released recently for the new hero in Overwatch, and they were talking about how they did the ability, and it's very funny. Like it's actually a really entertaining video where they're basically saying this character has a giant drill sound, like a giant like huge drill they drill into the ground with. And it's like, what sound would you make to compose this yourself? Well, they basically realized as they walked to their office, there's these cabinets, those big metal cabinets with a handle. They just shook the handle a lot to get the metal crunch sound. And then when they were trying to find what that like charge up for the energy of the drill was, they were doing exercise and used one of those strength bands. And they were happening to be in a weird pose, and it made this like foing sound that they really liked. And so they basically went back to work, brought it like legs in the air, trying to record this sound effect that made this spring sound. And it became the underpinning for this character's charge up and powers. And obviously it sounds really good once you start layering all of these things together and you understand how it puts and you wouldn't notice. But Foley's always been fascinating to me because the idea that you can go to work and just like live your life and every sound is possibly an embedded work you can do something fun with is an interesting way to kind of live your life. It's much more, it sounds like a fun way to engage your work and your hobbies in the same thing. So that, again, you can tell there's passion in a lot of the stuff in games like that. Pity the game itself has issues now that's not really worth playing. But the actual fundamentals of all of the systems and stuff is, I still just love it academically. Like I really wish I could enjoy playing it.
So I did want to get into asking Yorai about some animation stuff in a second, but first there were a couple questions I just wanted to pop up and see if we can answer them if anybody has the answer. One was about the job system and Burst working on Quest devices. Do you know this works for multi-threading on Quest devices? I haven't tried enabling Burst on a Quest build ever.
I don't own any Quest device, so I can't confirm any of that.
I got into my storage finally and got them out, so I've got them here now, but I haven't actually tried yet. I haven't hooked it up.
Conceptually, I would say it would probably work. I don't know anything that Burst doesn't work on, because most devices these days have some multi-threading capacity, and Burst is essentially just an IL to CPP compiler optimizer. I'm saying this wrong. I'm thinking of something else, but basically, it's just optimizing the lower level code. It shouldn't be limited. The job system separately is a different requirement set, but I would believe that the Quest is capable of it.
Yeah, I would assume so. Story, do you know?
A lot of Unity's internal packages use the job system to some capacity, so I would like to believe that they are not breaking their own systems for it.
Yeah. And then about that V-Rising video, they were wondering if it still applies, since you did mention it was in dots 0.8, or is it too changed, or how much of it applies?
So let me just correct some things. I think it was in 0.1.8, not 0.8. That's a very big distinction.
I didn't think there was a 0.8. I thought they went from 0.5 to 0.51 to 1.
Yeah. So on top of that, it's still very relevant. The concepts do not change, just the implementations of those concepts. Specifically, dots is a tech stack of 3 different things, and the only thing you really care about in regards to when you talk about dots is the entities package, because the rest is mainly internal implementations TM that do not change how you're actually offering your code. But the entities are a big thing, because now you have data pieces and you are baking subscenes, small chunks of data that you can stream in and out, and they load into actual entities that don't necessarily need game object representations in your editor, etc. So it can optimize a lot of that code and how it runs for you, because it keeps the certain different aspects that are put into a subscene such that it can load the important things together. That's something that you don't get with standard Unity, because memory can be all over the place. Some systems can be like, hey, run this transform, and then that rigid body, and then that rigid body, and then that transform, and that's not what you want. You want all the things of the same similar type to run together. Now, Unity does do some stuff to optimize that for you. That's why when you do different components, they update in different orders, and you have the entire execution order stuff on the documentation. Won't get into that. But basically, Dots optimizes that for you. Now, it comes with a set of tools to do this more easily. One of them is this subscene baking stuff. It's basically saying, hey, you can set what part of the world is this, just like a scene split by coordinates, just like Powell's World Streamer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's made for Dots, and with Dots, you can do a lot of stuff that are far better when done at scale because it's built for it. So, yeah.
All right. So, but in general, it definitely applies, and people should go watch
definitely.
it. Yeah, I agree.
The only real difference that occurred in the 0.5 and 1.0 versions of Dots that would change how you think about things is, in early Dots, you would add and remove components. This would be a structural change to how an entity is basically composed. If you had 2 things and now you added a herd tag, that's 3 things. Because you have 3 things, you no longer fit in the group of the things that only have 2 things in them. So you need to be put in a different group of 3 things. That's not great, because every time you do that, you have to stop, move something, copy everything around, shuffle it, whatever you need to, just to make sure that there is that group in existence at all. And then that thing is in that group, and then you remove it from that other group, and you potentially minimize that group so there is no gap. And all of that was slow. Very,
Yeah, it
very
sounds
slow.
super costly.
Yeah, exactly. It's still faster than standard Unity components, but it was slow. So the Dots team realized, okay, we see that a lot of people really love adding and removing tags. What if we just allowed an enabled flag that just gets turned on and off, and then we don't need to do all these structural changes? So that's what they did. And now they optimize the code a lot so that it skips stuff that don't have the certain tag on or off. And they still keep trackers of like what parts do I actually want to load for the things that have this and that update enabled, but it's faster and it's cleaner. So that is like that's the only conceptual difference. So if you see them adding and removing things, remember that you just need to enable and disable the actual component. And there is a whole bunch of documentation for Dots. It's actually one of the best documented packages in Unity. So I heavily recommend reading that if you want to enter Dots from scratch. It will really take you like through everything. I used the documentation to build an entirely functional online multiplayer using Dots and the Ghost replication system, and it was relatively pleasant out of all the package documentations that I read.
Nice. Well, it looks like your feedback there and advice is very appreciated. So it seems good. That's cool. I didn't realize that they'd done that too. That was one of the things that drove me nuts, was having to add and remove components when I want. That was I didn't realize that change would come. I need to start watching Johnny's show regularly and get back into Dots stuff a little bit more. If you're interested in that, by the way, make sure that you're watching. They go live in just a couple hours, and so all Dot stuff. It's really good. And then there was a question about the coursework stuff for the game architecture course. I will be sending out some info for current students, some discount stuff and other things. I'm still working on getting it all up and running. There's a whole bunch of weird stuff with the page, just trying to get working. The link is right there if anybody wants to check it out. Just going into single player, bigger game stuff. Trying to, my goal is basically to build, show everybody how to build Andrew's game, the Barbarian, just from scratch, and so you can build the whole thing in a week that he's been building for years. That's kind of the like, here you go.
Yeah.
And then I give it to Andrew and be like, here you go, Andrew, here's your game.
Yeah. And then I'll take it and I'll make the Barbarian too.
Yeah. No, it's getting into similar types of systems though. So how to build and kind of tie together a bunch of systems from scratch, all that kind of stuff. Stealing Andrew's game copyright. Lots of cool. I have I think it's still on there unless I was messing around with things, but Andrew's mimic was licking the whole page for the longest time. You would scroll and his tongue is just out, and then you'd click it and it would do a little lick animation and disappear. Nice. I might have disabled it because I was running into CPU load issues on the server. Apparently I blew it up and it hit 100%, and it's like, oh, okay. But I'll turn it back on if it's off, so everybody can get lick the page with the mimic. It just made me laugh too much. I couldn't turn it off.
It's important.
Yes, it was just like sitting there with the tongue out. That was that was the animated GIF thing that I had. So when we talked about the animated GIF earlier, that was the only thing that would play there with the transparency when I clicked on it.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And Dustin is right. The key is to not knowing what you're doing so you can learn more. And that makes the games take longer because you learn more. And then you go back and you do it. But it's funny, last night I was actually working on the Legend of the Stones games, and I'm at the point where I'm redoing once again enemy movement. And I've been taking into account stuff that, Jason, you've been talking about recently, also stuff that I've recently learned from doing the Projectile Factory. And, I had played with the behavior, Muse behavior for a bit. I've abandoned that and gone back to the age-old ways of doing things the way I know how to do for the most part. Mm-hmm. But I'm throwing in new things like, okay, well, now I can have different objects to handle the attacks versus hard coding that into a class. And it's interesting the way that it's exactly what Dustin has said. As I learn more, I want to do things differently. I want to do, it's not necessarily better, because per one of your most recent videos, Jason, the step one is make it work, then do it right, and then do it fast. And so it's not necessarily better, but it is for me, the enjoyment I get from it is doing things in a new way that feels better, or that enables new opportunities, and just a behavior based system. I think that is at the component, not a component, but what pattern is that when you use behaviors, like objects that you drop in? I know it's one of the
Well, the
patterns.
component model is as good as anything else if you're
Yeah.
describing it. But I will say that's actually why, because I'm such a magnanimous person, that I'm not actually watching your streams these days. Because if I was there, I'd derail you and you wouldn't get work done. So the actual reason I'm not there is for your benefit, to make sure you get work done.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate you not hanging out with me for my benefit.
It's giving you space to grow.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna do a stream last night, but I ended up not doing it. I had some other things going on too, but I still got work done, and yeah. But it's just interesting, the learning and changing, and it delays the game. But I think for a lot of us, part of the goal is not necessarily to finish the game, but is just to making the game is fun.
Yeah, honestly, I joke about this a lot, and I've been, people were unhappy with me when I said that if you want your game to be a product, you have to treat it like a product. Well, I'm not saying that you have to always at all times have no fun. What I'm saying is they're two different things. For example, I love productivity even when I've got nothing to be productive about. I'm currently learning a lot of new stuff with NVim, and I've recently changed my browser from Vivaldi to Arc browser, and I swap out my tools a lot because there's a joy in novelty, right? You're learning new things. There's a bit of interest in trying out new tools, finding new workflows, seeing what works for you. It's not always the most productive during the time periods, but I find that it's constant. It's testing my understanding of what I like. It's trying out new things, and sometimes that's fine. But what I really want to hammer home, and I keep trying to say the separation, is you have to be aware of what you're doing. Like I call this, which sounds disparaging, faffing around. If I'm faffing around, I can have fun faffing around, but I'm under no illusion that that time is going to be directly related to any financial success. Other times where I want something to be successful, I have to accept that sitting down to work and then just moving boxes around the screen or clicking scenes or scrolling my code for 30 minutes while I'm trying to figure out what to do is not work. It's just ways of saying, well, at least I opened the project, I feel good about it. So again, I have no problem with people messing around and having fun, as long as you acknowledge what your time is doing. It's the whole presence concept. As long as you're aware. Just it's when people spend years saying they're working on a game because they've because I know people who quit a job to make a game, and half of their time is faffing around, and it's you're doing yourself a disservice by not being self-aware on that fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so, again, have fun, but be aware. That's all I ever really mean by that.
Yeah, and that's where I think to the make it work comes into play. Literally make it work. Don't over engineer it because that you could do it better necessarily.
You might want to do something crazy one day. In 3 years, you might have 100 people working on this thing, and you're going to turn it into an open world thing. So you got to get it ready.
Better prepare for that, because you never know. But that's as an example of one of the things I did. I made a move script, and it was just for moving. Then I added this, and I added a look, and I added, can they see the player? Could they see the player if they turned around? The hearing distance, can they hear them? And then I was like, okay, so I made this one script, and then I was like, all right, now it's time to go and extract these into their own little classes. And that process of, okay, it works, now make it into its own little classes, because now everyone can have the hearings thing. You can have a blind character that can still hear. You don't need to put the class on that checks raycasts, because they don't do that. But
yeah, I've got a really good example of this. It's actually and again, I catch myself doing this all the time. I wanted a config file for a project I was working on. So your standard, if you ever worked in .NET stuff, there's your standard dev.config or prod.config. And effectively,
config.
Yeah, you can basically have here's a good example is for all these days with APIs and AI stuff, you want a key that you can put into something. And so you don't want the key in the code, you want a key in something that doesn't get out of the source control, blah, blah, blah. And it's I was okay, I want that implementation. How am I going to do it? And I was sitting down and I was writing out a config class, which has a tree structure, and I could build, and I was thinking about, I wrote this whole big thing and I wanted to build a system. And I was getting annoyed at myself going, I don't want to build a config system. I want a config file. And then I kind of stopped, paused, and said, what is the dumbest but functional way to get this to work? And I was like, okay, well, what I want is basically a JSON structure, especially with nested, because if you do it properly, you want to be able to have a section called like, keys, or a section called hashes or whatever, and do separate sections. And I was like, okay, I want it to work the way something like JSON parsing works in JSON.NET. I'm like, well, what if behind the scenes, I just use jobject.parse, and then I used the indexer into that. And then, long story short, in 4 lines of code, I had a working thing. I was like, oh, that does everything I need. I did wrap it in an iConfig interface so I can hide all that mess and not think about it. It's not a very, it's so easy to mess with in a way that's not very sustainable or scalable, but I can just get back to work. It works now. And if the time ever comes that I'm like, I don't want to, later on, I ended up adding, for example, a bcrypt layer that everything I added, I could add a salt and a hash and make sure that the keys are decrypted in, and to make sure that it's secure for various reasons. But the fact is, all of that's kind of opaque relative to the other stuff. And it's like, that's what I wanted. And yeah, so even to myself, it's very easy to go, what are all the things I could do, as opposed to, what am I trying to do? Do I know the dumbest way to do that or the simplest? Yes. And then you ask a different question, which is, can I live with how dumb it is now? Or is it too dumb? Do I need to go a little bit better? And then go as far as you're willing to live with. And that, to me, has been the magic trick for all of this stuff, is do it the dumb way, and then look at it and go, no, that's too much. I need to at least put a guard clause or something. And then once you're like, I can live with that. I wouldn't feel ashamed. I wouldn't be proud, but I wouldn't feel ashamed of that. Now I can move on to something else. And yeah, it happens to everybody. You have to kind of catch yourself sometimes.
There is something to remember here, which is the term follow your North Star. Basically, if you are trying to get the thing done, do not go on side quests. Get the thing done.
My character needs to grind.
Okay, let's put it a different way. Even if you go on side quests, make sure they raise the stats that actually help you on your main quest. This is the biggest problem that people face when they're trying to do something that sounds interesting. When they stumbled upon it on the way to do the actual thing they feel they need to do, and it's entirely different a skill set, so they don't gain anything of value for their primary task by doing so.
Maybe you should build a whole new web page, Andrew.
My webpage is out of date.
See, you could learn React real quick.
Yeah, and the magicgames.com site is way out of date, and I need to somehow link those two together. That's actually a good question. I should probably hire somebody to do this.
All right, Greg, you got to get going.
Yep.
Any updates on your game before you go?
Still polishing it. I got some good feedback from the guys in the mastermind group I'm in.
Nice.
Uri was talking about being able to visually pick out things, and those tune numbers that you turned me on to.
Yeah.
The contrast wasn't real good for them against the background, so I added an outline shader to them, and they pop a little bit more now. And got some other good feedback from them. So yeah, just trying to make sure there's no bugs in it before I submit it to them for review.
Nice. Well, yeah, we got to see it. It'll be next week, right?
Yep.
All right. That'll be awesome. All right. Well, it was good seeing you, Greg. We'll see you again next week.
Have a good one, everybody.
All right. So last question before we get into animation stuff. Story, there was a question about your tooling recommendations for design or game design stuff. Any new recommendations, or are you still with Eagle?
God, don't start me on these kinds of cuts, because I can go forever.
Maybe we'll go to animation first if it's a big answer. I didn't know if it was just going to be like, yeah, stick with the Eagle.
Let me just have a quick mental check here on the stuff that I 100% recommend. Yeah, Eagle, obviously, I still use that literally every day, pretty much. I use SyncThing to keep things in sync between different devices. Obsidian for my notes. I use iWriter when I want a simple writing space. Anything else come to mind? WizTree came up a while back as organizing large files and complex systems stuff. Search Everything is obviously the search tool I use for all of my stuff. Flow Launcher is what I use for accessing all my files. Directory Opus is my Explorer replacement. They're probably those ones are the ones I can't live without.
What about project management? I think that was the key one they were asking about.
My spiciest hot take on that is actually I normally either just use Trello or Codex. I do not use anything too fancy because I find in 99% of cases you just want boxes that say thing that has a web link associated with it. I find if you go too ham with it, nobody uses it. If I had a group of people familiar with GitHub, I'd probably use GitHub's native stuff because it actually has a lot of that stuff that people don't really use that much. But you'd have to have people familiar with the GitHub concept and ecosystem because it's not intuitive. They really made a point of making it business facing in all ways. Yeah, it also, if you're using GitHub for web stuff, by the way, you can actually put a little command at the end and jump straight to VS Code from any repo, which is really fast for modifying stuff. And there's a lot of really cool, like in browser, it'll do it straight to VS Code. So there's like quick fixes and stuff. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I would say Notion is really good for organizing stuff, but I just find it's too slow. If I had any patience, I would recommend it, but I can't just because it's so slow. I've started moving to like NeoVim for half of my local file management, so I'm used to stuff being relatively instant. And the idea of waiting, press the search box and wait for the search box to appear kills me. I can't even like that's just too slow for me. But
yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, you've got me sold on Obsidian. I'm slowly trying to work in more and more of your tools, but it's a lot.
Oh, and I'm drawing 100% EscalaDraw. I use literally nothing else because of the integration with Obsidian. You could say that in some cases I'll use ChatGPT to generate things like mermaid.js notation for like if I want to demonstrate something visually, but 99% of the time I'd use the same EscalaDraw, which by the way, if you're following Zolt's channel on YouTube, he's got the integration stuff that actually has code automations. So you can iterate your vaults, write custom JavaScript code that'll generate EscalaDraw drawings and modify it in real time. He actually uses it like a live dashboard. You can get really crazy with EscalaDraw if you're using the local version. And of course I use Vim in Obsidian. And FYI, if you're doing that, you want to make sure to get the vimrc plugin for Obsidian. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to customize your key bindings. And anybody who uses Vim will have a headache when they realize that like you can't have your same key map bindings between your local Vim instance and so you're going to want to have to rebind your own stuff. I have like 10 key bindings I need for things like switching out of insert mode and stuff. But yeah, so I use Vim and Obsidian as well. Yeah, that's probably the basics. Obviously there's about 30 other small apps here and there that replace things, but they're the ones that I use literally every day.
This is the draw thing?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And this plugs into Obsidian somehow?
Yeah, there's a plugin where you can just literally make the drawings and pass them around. But the reason that's so powerful, by the way, is it's all like a simple sort of JSON syntax. So you can actually like copy and paste things. You can share it with people. You can drag in images. You can make links to things. And if it is in your Obsidian Vault, you can link these to notes and stuff. So you can make interactive drawings. You can share them. There's obviously squiggles like this aren't a good visual representation, but what people use it for
this is amazing.
People use it for like graphing relationships of narratives if they're doing stories or characters, or if they want to say describe system architecture, because there's actually a set of nodes for things like server or class diagrams. You can actually use this for big complex diagramming solutions. There's even templates already built in for things like flow graphs for doing application flow state. Like it gets very complicated in terms of what you want to do. Yeah, I think it's such a really nice format for that stuff.
I just generated that. I just told it to do the Unity frame loop, and it obviously doesn't have everything, but it's got the core update. It does the update part, which is what I said, update loop. So yeah, neat. Yeah, so that's really cool.
And of course, it has dark mode, so you don't have to look at this horrible bright mess the whole time as well. Which is
this is just the default loading up the page.
Yes,
so there's a way to switch it somewhere. In Obsidian, it would be opposite. So that's really, really cool. Okay, now I've got a new tool to try out and start working with before next week.
Yeah, and the other thing too is like because this existed long before Obsidian, which is quite nice. People who are familiar with that, when you use the Obsidian integration, it's the same thing. And so that's been a very nice tool that you can actually share it. And if you make notes in Obsidian and you don't want to share your vaults, you can literally highlight all of the shapes you made, go to the website, click paste, and then share that link and then have a shareable web link as well. So I find it's very rapid to do iterations for shareables. There's actually even a plugin that'll automatically make that process for you. But my point is you can very quickly share your stuff in a way, that way as well. I'm not a visual note taker as much, but there's a guy again, Zolt. If you check out just Obsidian, actually, if you just type Obsidian and Excalidraw, you'll find his channel, and he has huge, like, not just how it works, but he actually goes through the philosophy of thinking and how to use Zettelkasten and all this stuff through a visual medium. And like, I find it very useful just to learn how to think that way, because it's not the way I normally approach problem solving. So I'd recommend that if you're kind of looking at visual graph note-taking stuff.
Yeah. I'm gonna put that in there because I like using Obsidian for video stuff all the time, and just its little graph view is cool. But this is good, and you've got me. Okay. All right, let's go on to animation. I don't want to run out of time, and I know Yori's got a lot of thoughts on animation. Before we get into it, if anybody in chat has questions or thoughts about the current animation system, feel free to comment or ask away while we're getting into it. But the topic or question of the day is really on what's wrong with Unity's animation system, or maybe what could be better. What are kind of the pain points, and maybe curious what you think some of the strengths are too, if there are any that you guys can point out. If anybody here's got thoughts on that. But I know Yori's got by far the most experience with this stuff, so I'll let you kick it off.
Sure. So you asked me to point out the good things about the animation system too, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can sprinkle those in, right?
I'm just sure I can kick off the good small part away first. I'm kidding. So, hello everyone, I'm Yori. I just want to point out that my arc with the animation system before even like going through the entire list of things that are ought to change about it. I've started using Unity in 2015. I've tried using Unity with VR to control a character so it follows the wands and the head of the character. I've tried doing many different action game oriented designs with Unity's animator system. I've had my arc of saying this is trash and I need to move to do it with code. I've done everything that is possible to do with code with the animation system that Unity presented. Then Unity released the playables system, which is an underlying layer when they reworked how animations work in the engine, which lets you do a lot of different advanced stuff. And I've done all of those advanced stuff. I used one of the packages that's in preview that's now abandoned that shows you the playable graph. I have gone through an arc of saying, oh, look, there's a new tool out that's using the playable system that's actually pretty great. It's called Animancer. Animancer is the best thing since sliced bread. I will praise Animancer repeatedly and make sure that everybody knows it exists, because Unity's animator is trash and the code for the animator is trash and playables are trash, but Animancer is good.
I remember chuckling at that phase, because at the exact moment that was happening, another friend of mine was having the opposite sort of thing where they had just switched. And I was like, okay, because I'm not in this area that much, so I don't have super strong opinions. But I have two people who do have strong opinions who were shouting completely opposing things in my ear at different points. And I was laughing the whole time going, okay, this isn't a clear-cut problem. Somebody's going to change at some point. I don't know who. And it was just funny to see how it was going to play out.
Yeah, so I had that arc. I praised Animancer repeatedly. I told others how Animancer is good and why it's good and why I think they should be using it. And then I realized, actually, it's not solving a lot of the core problems I have, and it's not Animancer's fault. It's actually Unity's fault. It's not letting Animancer do what Animancer needs. So I went back to using the animator component and I started solving the actual problems that matter with Unity's animation system with internal code that you don't have access to by default and you have to use reflection for. And now I'm using the animator happily, which is a point where I don't think I wanted to end up in. Now, all that said, animator is trash. Now, I'm not against Unity. I think they're doing relatively okay job trying to make most systems, but there is a lot that needs to be improved on. And the first thing that I think should be improved on is the understanding of what Animator does for people. I have held a 40-minute talk in the Game Dev Guild last year, I think it was, about what is actually good about the Animator component in Unity. And I think
I think I still have that link on my Streamable if you ever want to share that as well.
Yeah, feel free to share it on like the chat. I don't mind.
Yeah, I'll go grab that in a sec.
Yeah, if you can put the link or drop it in chat real quick.
Yeah, so it's a 40-minute talk. It's guiding you from zero on why Animator even exists. And to put it very, very shortly, in the past, everything was code. You did not have a visual editor for animations, which means if a designer wanted to add a new animation to the game, they would be dependent on a programmer to do it. And that was bad because it slowed down the entire team. The programmer couldn't focus on programming jobs, and the animator couldn't do anything until the programmer gave them a tool to do it. And also, you couldn't preview changes quickly. If you have a transition between animation A and animation B, you don't know when the animation happens, if it's smooth enough, if it's on the exact keyframe, and how long it would take. Further, you didn't have a flow of the animations. Now, Animator tried to do solutions for all of that, plus new things like humanoid descriptions, so you can transfer animations from humanoid A to humanoid B. This is all congealed up in a single mechanism system, as they named it, which is the animator component, the animator controller, the humanoid avatar, the generic avatar, and all of those stuff. And without rerunning my entire talk, because they put everything together, there are perceptive problems in how you should be using all of this. People don't understand 90% of the functionality that's within in that system. The 10% that they do understand, they did not read fully, so they don't know the small hijinks. And out of those 10% or 6% that they are actually capable of using, they have problems because the code doesn't actually function without knowing the rest of the 90%. Which means you get stuck with an animation system that you can't use easily, that doesn't work nicely with the code, that is strangely typed and fails at every corner, and that you cannot work together fast with for anybody. Not the animator, not the programmer, and not like literally anybody in the pipeline. And then on top of that, they added a 2D system, which is a mess. But yeah. Which is to say, a lot of things need to be improved, and the first one is making sure people know that the 90% exists. For example, state machine behaviors. No matter how many times I mention it, it's the single strongest feature of the animator state machine, which is not a necessary thing that you have to use. With the playables, you can actually play animations without any animation component or any animator component. But nobody knows that playables exist because playables is not mentioned almost anywhere in the documentation without you knowing that it exists. It's a thing that you had to read on a Unity blog post, go to the documentation, find it, read everything about it, and then start finding by yourself where it is used within the engine. But it's actually the best thing.
Well, with the one exception is if you start learning timelines from code, you'll hit the same avenue, but it's the same. Yeah, it's not very clear, but they are using the same principle baseline.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. But let me present an opposing stance on that. If you use the timeline, it already has an animation track, which means you don't need to face the playable system by yourself. There is a playable director, and there are tracks for everything that an animator would need, except for custom tracks that you build yourself, and even that comes with a wizard, so you don't have to create the 4 classes that it needs, so you don't actually have to do any of the playable stuff yourself. I'm not fighting against playables and saying like it's easy to find. And even if it was easy to find, if you associate it to timeline, you're doing it wrong, because timeline is like literally just one application of playables. So knowing about playables, knowing about state machine behaviors, understanding everything that there is in the animator component, which means knowing all the methods and what they actually do and what you can override and how you can override it, can help you a lot to make a better game. Just to put an example, a lot of people think that if you want to have an animated light bulb, when a character does a, oh, I got an idea thing, means that you have to have a light bulb embedded into the character because you cannot bind the animation to that light bulb. And worse, you have to use like an animation event on an animation clip, which means you now have to change the very crux of what the animation actually says in order to actually have it. And if the animation gets interrupted before you turn off the light bulb, after you turned it on, it stays on because that animation at the end never happens because you transitioned into another animation. So what do you do about all of that? Well, Animator has all the solutions for it, but you just don't know because Unity doesn't tell you. It's driving me nuts. It's like it's literally one of the
I
worst
admit
problems.
those kinds of problems are the things why whenever you go stupid programmer brain and try to solve it simply, I realize that for a lot of things like light bulbs and those sorts of things, rather than even doing the whole animation clip thing, because it used to bother me that the main thing that would bother me was that it would control at every update frame during the placement thing. And I was just like, oftentimes you just want to run something for a limited time coroutine or whatever. So long story short, I would often defer even in those scenarios where it might have been easier for me to make an animation clip. I would have often previously just written a series of steps in some sort of sequencer, maybe coroutines, maybe my own, maybe whatever. So I found I bypassed a lot of that, but then I was hampering myself because sometimes I'd have to sit there and write an overly complicated mess of stuff for something that would be very easily explained by a couple of interpolations. And yeah, it gets a bit messy.
Yeah, so just to cut it very simply, for those who wonder about the light bulb issue, first off, if you don't want to spoil your animation clips with new events and you want it to be actually reliable, if you have an animation state, that state can have state behaviors. These are part of the animator controller, not your character. They have extra scriptable objects that are basically behaviors. They look like components in the editor, but they're scriptable objects. And you can put methods in them that are specific to the animator that the animator will call for on-state enter, on-state update, on-state exit, and there are also two for on-state machine enter, state machine exit. There are also two for on-state IK, and there was one more that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But there are good stuff there.
And like the default mono behavior, it's the same thing where you click the button, you add it, it'll even drop the default function for on update and stuff for you, so it gives you the starting point. But yeah, it's like you don't even know it's there. I had a friend of mine who again was working on a game for a year and a half with a strong he basically had a combo system in a 2D sort of Souls-like, and he didn't know that existed for the entire year and a half. It's a very complicated nested combat system, and then I pointed it out to him one day, and he basically said, "I'll be back in about a month. I have to rewrite my entire animation system because this is so much easier for a lot of these." And then it became, because a lot of it was like he had multiple weapons with multiple combos and multiple stuff, and it became a lot easier when you could just use flags for triggering things at certain places. And so, yeah, again, even people who are knee deep in this stuff don't know it's there because it's a hidden button in the bottom right. Only if you're in a particular window.
It's not hidden though. If you ever worked with the animation system and you picked any animation animator state, like literally, hey, I made a new state, let me assign the animation clip, it's there.
It is a big rectangle button, but it's in the bottom right in a place where it's never talked. It's not a thing that's common enough.
It's on the inspector. You look at the inspector all the time. You're working with components.
No, I don't know. I didn't seem, because every new button, the other thing too is if you see a new button, your immediate reaction, and this is actually kind of a side tangent, but it's something related to all the other stuff. I talk about all these new tools and stuff I use. The first thing I do when I get a new tool is I turn off every feature it has. A good example of this is I install VS Code and I turn off everything because it's a mess of confusing, scary buttons. And I want to, first of all, find problems and then turn on the features that solve the problems I have. Now, again, some people don't like that approach, but for me, it basically means that over time, I get more comfortable with an application. And again, look, because a lot of people do, is they won't press the button because they see new buttons. New buttons are scary. What you need is a problem that requires you to go hunting for a solution that then highlights the button. So the short answer is nobody's going to press scary buttons. That's just a fact.
Okay, so I have a different philosophy about most of the things that I approach in life, which is if I am giving a manual, I will read the manual before I interact with anything. I will not press the first easy going button. I will read everything to know that if something is about to explode, here is where I click. And then, when I know all of the buttons to a sufficient degree that I know that one, they exist, roughly where they are, and roughly what they do, then I start using the tool. And if I need to go...
so
you don't throw the box and the instructions
I
away
read the
and
manual
then
for my
microwave.
I read the manual for my washing machine.
Now I know who those Monster Hunter 500-page opening title sequence tutorials are for, because they're not for me. Because I've forgotten. I take 7 steps forward. It's right, here's how you cook. It's I haven't even walked yet, and you're teaching me to cook. I don't even know what this. So yeah, at least somebody gets something out of it. Because for me, it's the opposite. For me, it's you learn through, you do a thing, you internalize why it's valuable, and you repeat. And you have a problem, solution, problem, solution. That's how I like to learn things.
Yeah, on the stuff that you guys have all hit so far, what would you recommend changing? Like if you were in control at Unity and you were changing the animation system, just for the things that have been talked about so far, how would you change it, or would you change it? Is it just
Okay, so I will not comment on the things that we have talked about because that's not the first thing I would change. From the
okay?
things we have talked about, I've said the main biggest problem is that people don't know how to use the system. If people like story exist and know the meaning way at all, giving people more information is not going to solve it for them. As a developer on Terraria, I know people do not read. I fight at every corner to make sure every sentence is smaller, shorter, and easier to go with because I know that people don't want to read it, they want to play.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the editor and you're not reading the manual like some monster because you're treating it as just a hobby, then adding more text will not help you. So, making it visually more cohesive so that things are near where they need to be, so that they are easy to find, easy to click, even by mistake, and to do something good, and to be reliably turned back if you don't know what you did, that would be a very good first step to increasing the awareness of most features. The idea that adding behaviors is on the bottom when a lot of people would get a lot of benefit from them. The idea of animation events not being near the animator state, so you have to leave the animator state just to add a freaking event, is horrible and should not happen. You should have access to the events immediately. The idea that they are associated to a clip instead of the state is a travesty. I have listed most of that in a thread, by the way, of the what animation feedback you would have, of the quarterly animation system update, Q2 2024 on the Unity forums that you should all go read and respond with what you want to see from the animation system on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, let's drop a link in the description too, so everybody can go put their stuff on it too. I want to make sure to get that in there. Pretty good tip.
I haven't given any particular feel. Like I said, to be honest, I shout about enough things. I try to only shout about stuff that directly affects me, and so I don't tend to have strong opinions on stuff that I don't use enough to really warrant the strong opinions. But I will say that my one bit of issue or advice regarding a lot of these animation tools would be, I truly believe the best era of Unity tutorials was some of the earliest, and the one that comes to mind particularly was, I'm pretty sure we've all seen them. There was one stage, there was a bunch of tutorials on how rigid bodies work, and it was just a ball that like flew into the air and you applied force to it. And there's one where the ball hits a wall and you turn different colliders. And there's one with UI, and it was a white box with a black border on the top. And they went through these really tiny little demos, which is just, what is rigid body? Let's try adding velocity. What is this? And it's just really small step video tutorials that basically said, here is a problem, here is a solution, here's us using a singular feature to solve that problem or that solution. Next. And they're all these little bite-sized videos. And I think now, and Unity has so many features, that the idea tends to be, here's step one to get you started, and then here's a book about the 800 other features you could use if you'd like. And it's like, cool, but I always go back to, I would love to see a just general, we're going to propose problems in incremental steps and then show you solutions to these steps. And it should be an 8 to 10 minute video that says, right, you are trying to pick up a sword with your animation in Unity. Here is 3 ways you could do it, and here's why we recommend this one. Done. Like, it just, these little, like, we don't need to go into the history of each of the components or why they're there, what the solutions are. We just need to go, right now there's 3 methods. You can do it this way, this way, or this way. An example, if I was doing input, I would say, I'm doing input in Unity. The default input.get button, you could do it that way. Don't do it that way. If you see it, it's not bad, just don't do it anymore. Next, if you're using the new input system, keyboard.current.get whatever does the same thing. There's 3 ways to do it. Using a variable key, using a string key, using a whatever. Don't do that either unless you really have to. Next, input action. You could do it that way. It'll expose it in the editor. It's a bit better, blah, blah, blah. But now you have to modify it every time. Don't do it that way either. You can, but I wouldn't recommend it. Finally, now you can use it this way with a dedicated file, with custom mappings, blah, blah, blah. Here's how you can do it. And if you want to read further, here's all the guides on how to go into more depths on blah, blah, blah. But you've left someone with a, oh, you want to do input? Here's how you do input. And here's the other ways you've probably been shown it and why we do or do not recommend it. And I think you could do that with each one of these systems. And oftentimes very small, repeatable problems. Fire a gun, pick up an item, switch character, switch outfits. Like, each of these are things that everybody's hitting. And they are very complicated problems with multiple issues. But you can basically say, here's the kind of the core structural system of how you'd approach it. IK is another one. There's like 7 ways to do like foot IK and different things. It's like, just here's 2 or 3. Just pick, you can pick one of these. Here's the pros and cons next, right? So
Okay, so with information out of the way, and I fully agree with you, Story, interactive tutorials that are from the actual Unity developers would be great, because I think they don't do enough of a job with that at all. But that's still not the main thing that I would change about the animation system. The worst part about the animation system right now is that once you know everything about it, even to the degree that you can talk to the developers competently about features and they may not remember something that you know because it's in your active memory and not theirs, is that once you know Animator perfectly, it still can't do a lot of things that you ask it to do, which is bad, because you need to do certain things reliably. The first of them is when you actually call an event, the animator may miss it. And I don't mean it won't call it, I mean it will not call it at the appropriate time. So let's do a very quick example. If I have a clock and that clock has a hand and that hand starts spinning, and I'm saying I have an animation event that at 3 o'clock I shoot a fireball at the direction that the hand is aiming at, and at 2.99 I get a frame drop and I move instantly to 4, the event will be called at 4, not at 3, even though I had it at 3. Which means I will not be shooting the fireball to the correct location. Which means if I have anything dynamic on the clock hand that shoots a fireball, I can no longer trust that animation to do the thing as it should do, etc., etc. It sucks. There is no good way around it. The closest way that I have gotten to is, one, disabling automatic updates for the animator, so it only updates manually. Two, looking at all the animations that are currently playing and what is their play rate. Three, finding all the animation events on those animations and start sub-stepping the animator so it updates at the tick rate of the animation, and make sure it steps on exact steps so it properly hits the exact point at which the animation event happens, which may itself be in a sub-step. It's not fun. Like,
What would you recommend as the solution there because I mean, you've got that frame drop, you got some method for just backdating the.
So what I described is basically the core truth solution, which means I am actually checking if an event is about to be hit on a frame in which an animation event is about to be hit, because I know my delta time ahead of time, right? And I know my play rate ahead of time, right? So what I can do is say, okay, I see that there is an animation that I would be passing by on this. I know I would be playing it because, like, in the end of the day, animator already does that. It's already going to be playing it. They know that. So what they can do is they can substep. On that one frame, you'll be sampling the animation twice. Once at the exact point at which the animation event has been called, you call the event, so everything is at the right value, and then you call update animation again with the remaining delta. And if you do it that way, you have reliable events at the exact frame, exact pose that the user has authored. And on top of that, if the event itself changes what animation you should be playing going forward, such as enabling a transition with the rest of the delta, you can let that happen and not miss the transition. So if I have an animation in which I grab an enemy and I'm checking, hey, did I actually hit an enemy? I can know that the animation will happen at the exact proper location. And then if I actually grabbed an enemy or not, I can continue the animation or move to the having grabbed an enemy animation.
Yeah, it's similar to what we talked about before with bullets, right? Because the whole moving through time, possibly missing colliders, and you basically snapshot the correct versus the wrong, and then use delta then you have the control over resolution yourself. How would you like it to resolve?
Yeah, and on top of that, the second biggest problem, except like reliability, is the biggest problem. Once you have reliability, you can do anything else perfectly, even if it's with your own code. The second problem that is hardest to solve is prediction and reconciliation of an animation through clients. So that gets into a whole rabbit hole. But basically, let's say I have an animation. That animation has an event happen. I want reliable network. I have a character that's swinging. That swing is supposed to hit an enemy. But that enemy in multiplayer has shot me. That shot interrupts my attack. what should happen? Should I be slashing at the enemy, get a successful slash, and still be hurt? Should my attack be interrupted such that I never hit the enemy, and then the enemy basically won? Should I ignore his hit because I already went past the animation at the point from which I can be interrupted, and etc.? If you have that kind of stuff, rolling back an animation is extremely difficult. Unity does give you proper methods to say animator.play, or you can manually sample the time with playables to actually bring the animation to the exact point and exact blend that you need. It's very manual, very not fun to have.
Although I have done that a few times, by the way, as a small cheat where I got lazy and I was doing like a door swing and I couldn't be arsed with all of the complexities of that. So what you do is you can basically manually control the percentage effectively of the door, which also means you can reverse it back the other way. So you basically have with a single animation that you control, you can basically run your door up and down and then have the speed controlled as in code. And you can even then run that through a curve. So you can have an editor animation curve that controls the speed of an animation playing with whatever time you like, because all you're using the animator for is the frames of the individual steps. Although there's caveats to that too, because it does a weird thing with like overrun time, and you have to capture that too, and it gets a bit messy in places, but it works, but you have to like hack around it a bit.
Yeah, and now Wayman is in the Matrix. Well, yeah, you can do that. And to be fair, even if you don't want to do like something very complicated, in the animator state inspector, there is actually a speed field, and you can set that into a negative speed. It's allowed. It's a thing that can happen.
It will, but again, it'll accrue
the
time.
Normalized time. The normalized time will go crazy. Yeah. Now, to add to that, determinism is hard. The harder thing is events, because events call executive code somewhere else. And if you have to say, actually, that event didn't happen, and actually that event happened, and I also need it to happen 0.3 seconds into the future now because I'm resimulating everything, you don't have a way to do that in Unity right now. There is no way to bind the contents of the event to what should actually be happening. Now, there are some times that you don't want that. Like if you play the footstep sound, screw it. Let the footstep sound play. You don't want to speed it up or like slow it down. But there are other things that you don't want this for. For example, if you have an effect that begins playing and you don't want it to happen, like on my client, I crossed the racetrack first, so the race finish line pops confetti for me. But actually I got interrupted on the server, and now I'm reconciling, and now I didn't actually cross the finish line yet, so the confetti should disappear. So you need control over that, and there is no good way to do it with Unity at the moment. It's not an easy problem to solve, admittedly, but if we want entirely accurate multiplayer with rollback, we need a way to do that. Some developers have done solutions that do have some control over it. It's not very reliant on the animator. It's very convoluted. You basically want to have like signal on, signal off. And then if you're reconciling, like say you are reconciling a footstep event and it happened, but now you are redoing the entire history. And now that event is happening again, you're playing the footstep sound twice. You only want to have played it once. So there are a lot of things that you have to manage that ideally we shouldn't be forced to manage ourselves. So that's like one of the biggest things that needs to be solved. And it's admittedly more of a networking problem than an animation problem. It's just the limitation of the animation problem that doesn't let the networking problem be solved right now. So that's basically the biggest thing if you want like good multiplayer games going forward. It's one of the biggest problems I've outlined in my own comment on that one thread that we have mentioned earlier. There are other things, but they are not as big. The main things you want to have is reliable animations, deterministic animation control, if possible, and like the last few things are better previews and better usage of the tools. Like right now, if you have an animator state and you select it within the animator controller, you cannot see your animation playing. There is no reason. You just can't. You just can. If you click an animation transition, that's go to town. You can see that.
Yeah.
If you click
preview that, no problem.
Yeah. Blend tree, sure. See the animation. Animator states, simplest animation possible. Never heard of it.
How would you do the animation events in the states? By the way, you kind of mentioned that
So
it'd be nicer if they were there. Like, where would you put? It would be like in the
our
like on
timeline-
the animation state. You just add it basically, kind of like
Yeah,
you do on the
so-
animator.
Yeah, so if I can draw from Unreal as an example, Unreal has a montage editor, which basically say, pick an animation that exists, add new things to it. And the things you can add are signals. Signals are either one point in time in which a thing happens, and you can bind anything you want to it, including blueprints and call any kind of scripting you want. And it has a preview, because it's like you preview it in a preview window, and it's all playing there. And you can also have signals that have a start and a stop. And if you get cancelled, the animation gets cancelled anywhere there, the signal will stop. It is a reliable stopping point within the animation. So it has everything that it needs. And it can do it reliably. And it even gives you a preview for things that Unity doesn't, like particle systems, like audio playing. If you put a footstep event and you're setting a default footstep sound, that default footstep sound will play. And you can still use a blueprint to check what floor you're actually under in runtime and have like grass sounds or stone sounds or whatever sounds. If you have a fireball shooting, you can literally see the particle system of that fireball shooting about as you're doing it. If you're adding a sword slash, you can see the sword trail. You can actually see, hey, my animation isn't actually entirely accurate. Let me correct that animation, go back to the animation, change it, and check the preview, and the preview is now corrected with a proper trail. You can even add hitbox pre-authoring, so you have like the whole trail of the stuff you hit. By the way, another thing with that animation missing part, you will miss hitboxes. That's actually a problem in Unreal as well. There are solutions in Unreal that run way better, which basically pre-calculate the path of what should be evaluated for the animation. That said, that's still not the most true solution. Because now you lost the ability to transition between two animations and still have a correct path. Because if you pre-baked it for a single animation, you're not actually using the runtime where the weapon should be. There are a lot of very small scale annoying things there. An example of like inaccuracy with hitboxes, let's say I have a sword swing and it's doing like this kind of thing, like from here to here, and I'm doing in one update 180 degrees. In Unity, the animation system just evaluates. It doesn't actually do a path. There is no this kind of thing. It's just here and then it's there.
This instant.
Yeah. And because it's instant, the only thing I can do as a developer is going from this point to that point, and it's basically like not the hitbox you want. You missed the entire sword arc.
Mhm.
So there is no good solution for that because we are just evaluating and we're not going through the actual path. And the thing I mentioned at the start, where I say, let me check the animation sample rate and actually go at substepping every single tick of that animation, that's the way you get that full path. It's not great, but it's the most accurate one because you're actually going through the entire set of keyframes that the animator has actually authored. So if the animator has actually said, actually it's going through this kind of area right now, I will go through that, even if the player doesn't see it, even if it's an entire waste of performance, even if I'm animating that character 6 times per frame, which means it's basically like running 6 characters at once. It's worth it. Especially in games where there aren't many characters. Like if you're doing a single like one-on-one, who cares? If you
Seems like it should, you just turn it on or off, and the ones you don't care about it, wouldn't have it. Nice. Oh yeah, that seems like. Are there any other big things with the animators? Songfuel was asking if there was anything with the AI animator. I know that they have the Muse Animate. I think it's in beta right now. I don't know. I haven't played with it much though.
Okay, so the AI animator for Muse Animator is basically an animation generator for humanoids, which means it doesn't have any feature for anything advanced. Like if you have a weapon bone on the character, like a sword or whatever, that will not be animated for you. That you can only do basic humanoids of basic humanoid standard size. Not great. The animations aren't accurate. Not great. There are a lot of problems with it. I don't recommend it right now. It's too early. As for can you use timelines to approximate montages in Unity? Yes. So timeline is a visual editor in which you can drop signals into. They can be either instant or you can have a track range for them and you can do a lot of stuff with that. That's good. Except the timeline animation track specifically is designed for cutscenes, which means it's not good for a lot of dynamic tasks, such as I want to play an interruptible animation, such as I want to play an animation relative to the spot at which my character is standing, and not grounded to the entire world 000. A lot of this stuff could be changed with a very big asterisk, because you have to change the package to do it, because it's inbuilt into the package and it's the default behavior and you cannot override some of that. And the worst part, the most offensive part of it all, Unity has some internal code that they are calling from there. And you could not call internal code from packages by default because it's internal code, but it's internal exposed to. There is an attribute in C# in which you can say internal exposed to assembly path, and that assembly alone can access the methods. And that's how the animation track in the timeline works. You cannot write your own if you don't spoof that freaking assembly path. At least that's how it was like 2 years ago. I think I gave up on it after that. That said, I know a team that has done this and is using it to great effect. There is actually one of the more popular action gacha games called Punishing Grey Raven. If you watch their developer streams when they release new characters, you will sometimes see glimpses of how they're working on things, and they will actually be using a timeline track. And the timeline track will have animations and particle effects and sound systems for the characters, and apparently they're using it at runtime. So that's actually how the characters are driven. They offer some stuff that way. That said, some few things that I've heard from other developers, not NDA'd or anything, it's just like people poking around, how modding games works. Apparently, they are not even using game objects to represent how their entities work. It's all 2D simulation with just like a 3D model presentation. It's crazy. So I'm not sure exactly how much of the timeline is like effectively used, because they're effectively like controlling it from 2D simulation, placing a character, and then letting the timeline play just for the visuals. So do with that what you will. Not exactly fit for binding logic. Yeah.
So I had another thing pop up on the other window just right at the end there. This is a lot of stuff. So I've been trying to take notes too and keep update on all this.
And I already wrote most of this like on the thread. So
yeah, I know I need to get into the timeline playable stuff a little bit more myself too, because it's something I played with a little bit, but haven't actually used really in a big project. Do you have to start wrapping things up? What's that?
I was just going to say a small anecdotal thing. It's not super important, but it is something that if you work with designers, they love. They're so used to the long lead time of doing some change, pressing play, waiting for stuff to happen and whatever. Even just creating my own timeline tracks for relatively arbitrarily small things like I don't know, placing positions in the scene that would move with just move to, like really basic stuff. Creating timeline tracks for it let designers play a lot more because of the whole scrubbing timeline thing. And so sometimes, quite frankly, for my own laziness to get less problems and bugs in my direction, I'd create timeline tracks when it's a very artist heavy project where I know they're going to be like, I had one with palm trees and they kept tweaking how the leaves would flow and various things. And some of it was based on animations, but others was like tracked splines and stuff, and I'm like, I don't want you to go to me every time you want some code tweak on something. So making a timeline track where they can like merge nodes and do stuff just made my life a million times easier. So just as a side note, it's not just whatever value you get, it's actually quite nice to just have a real-time ticker that shows you the position relative, because a lot of projects I've worked on are literally, it is a 15-minute set thing, or it's 6 3-minute set chunks, and each chunk has these beats, and you can often make their life easier. And without getting into a whole big side note on that, you can even do stuff like have a notes track that lets you lay out the timeline. So I have like a blocks that would be sections of the thing so they could stay true to the original source. Or in the case of one project that was driven by an audio department, I would import the audio file from Audition. I would ask them to export the XML file that comes with that. And it has a beat marker for not just the track counts, but each of the clips they used, because the clips were sound clips for each of the like crashes of different sounds or ambulance or whatever. And I would build a track with events that would match, and they'd have basically a track they could subscribe to. And even if they deleted everything I added, it would give them a fully mapped one-to-one saying that's the frequency of time where the actual the alarm happens. And so if they want to put particles there, they can see exactly where every clip relative to the audio file was, because the audio team was kept changing it. And so if you've got something that changes by adding 12 seconds to the end or middle of an audio clip because they extend a shout of somebody or they mute something, the entire timeline condenses and everything breaks. So you need a way to import that and change it really fast. And so timeline can be really good when you've got a very like moving kind of goalpost like that too.
Yeah. On top of that, like timeline does have good quality of life features. You can run a timeline that runs other timelines, something to be aware of, and you can put pause markers on the timeline. Because
yeah,
it's
you
just
can loop
whatever
sections,
director.
you can then jump to regions, you can have subtracks, and so yeah, there's lots of crazy stuff. I never go too far because I find, again, once it starts getting into like nested stuff in nested stuff, you confuse somebody. I find it's usually easier just to have it relatively flat, but having tracks that do your own. Like again, example I used before is we had one project where mood was heavily tied to color. And so basically there was colors attributed to happiness or sadness or whatever. And as again, I don't want to be dealing with that. And so I had a mood track, and a mood track had mood clips. Mood clips had you pick a mood, and then they could cross blend the moods, and they could choose when a mood changes. And then I would just have a master collection of colors, and I could change them. And if they said they wanted different colors, they don't have to tweak things. They can just say, swap the moods, and I'll figure out that stuff myself.
Yeah. One more thing about the timeline. I don't consider it to be part of the animation system. It's more like a thing built on top. And I'm saying that very carefully because timeline is specifically a subset of what you do with animation, which is linear tracks. It's only built for playing linear tracks. It's not meant for splitting pathways. It's not meant for A/B choices. It's not doing any of that for you by default. The only thing it's doing is playing a track forward, and it's only got tools for that. You can turn it into an animation that does a system that does other things. I don't recommend doing that. You will face problems. It was not built for that. I just need to
No,
say.
literally what we did for one thing, we had another project. It was an airplane manufacturer, and we had to basically have someone walk down an airplane in VR, and they would interact with stuff, and then we'd run sequences like bins would open and then stuff would happen. We literally made timelines for each of the pieces, and then we ran our own update loop, which contained states, and states had an enter exit update, and then we had a is completed check, and we'd have weights for things like has reached point or has looked at thing or has pressed trigger, and that would just subsequently trigger a timeline, and then our system would wait until the timeline is finished, fires an event, and it would reactivate ours. So basically 2 parallel systems that would run. Kept it really simple for what you're describing.
Yeah, and you can also make a game out of that. Like if you're doing a visual novel, you can say once that timeline finishes and the player has made a choice, continue with a timeline that answers their choice. It's possible to do. I'm not saying it's not, but it doesn't come with timeline out of the box. Something that people
and it's so similar to things like Inkle as well. Like if you're using Ink as your language, it's effectively a box of variables, and you can subscribe to events. And so if you try to ham-fist your entire game into it, you'll have a lot of headaches. You can do some really cool variable stuff, but your best bet is to use it as basically this like in-out flag of various information. And if you want that to scale correctly, you're going to want a separate Blackboard system. Some people try to put all the variables inside of Ink scripts. You'll have a headache doing that. And so you want to use it exclusively as like a refresh update. And there's even a way to like inject variables at the start. So if you have your own Blackboard, you can basically say create bucket of properties, import it into the script, run it, and then when you're done, keep up to date with the last state of it to save out the variables and update your Blackboard. So yeah, you don't really want to be managing some of these complex systems inside of other systems.
Yeah, we got to do a full episode about playables and timeline and all this stuff. I feel like it would be good just to spend like a full hour talking about it. I got to get running though. I did just want to mention everybody go check out that spring sale. The Proto Factor sale set is up right now, 70% off. Andrew's got one coming up in the next couple of days. I linked it down there. It'll be in the description as well. Which one is that, Andrew? You want to tell everybody the name?
Which one it is? Is it the low poly monster bundle first? I think
so, and then the other monster bundle, but we'll put them both in the description. I just linked them in chat, and then I linked the Nature Manufacturer ones as well. And the game architecture course is open now. There's a link. You can go find out more about that. Email me if you got questions, and we will be back next week. I think it might be a slightly special time because I think I'm going to be traveling. So thanks again, everybody, for coming out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share with everybody, and we will see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, and go check out Your Eyes Talk. It's in the link in the description too. Go watch that whole thing. It's really great, and it's up there. All right, see y'all later.